Why do we care so much about transaction costs? Have you ever noticed that certain technologies and systems have become indispensable to you? Today, few people use paper maps anymore. They can just find directions with Google Maps. Online shopping has taken over the mall and Main Street as web stores, Amazon, Shopify, and Facebook Marketplace grow in popularity. Most of us carry around less cash because we can tap with our credit cards. We seldom go to the library or open a newspaper to learn about the world. You can probably name 10 more indispensable technologies or systems in your life. But the things on our list have one thing in common. They all save us time. In fact, many innovations share this feature. They are intended to make things easier to produce or buy. The private sector is constantly innovating to find better ways to lower prices and the time required for us to complete an exchange. You may not know it, but the public sector is engaged in a similar type of innovation competition. They are competing to see which economy has the lowest transaction costs. Transaction costs are the time to complete an exchange. They are the friction between a willing buyer and a willing seller. The lower the transaction costs, the more successful the economy. This is because exchanges will occur as transaction costs decrease. Why do you think China wanted to introduce a digital currency so quickly? They knew this would decrease transaction costs and give them a competitive advantage. We almost always want lower transaction costs in an economy, but we seldom measure them. When we do, we notice something rather powerful. We notice that some economies have been systematically prevented from economic competition because they can't lower their transaction costs. Clarence Jules Sr. first noticed back in 1968 that it takes too long to complete any investment on First Nation land. When we looked at this in 1998 systematically, we found it took 4 to 6 times longer to go from investment proposal to construction on some of the best located First Nation lands in Canada. This was an aha moment for us. It answers one of the most common questions about Indigenous economic development. Why is there so little business development and investment on Indigenous lands? It is simple. The transaction costs are too high. If you want to ask the same question in a more provocative manner, how can we tell that there is systemic bias towards Indigenous government jurisdiction in Canada? Again, it is the continued presence of high transaction costs. No Indigenous government would voluntarily continue to put their members at a competitive economic disadvantage, so it must be something in the system. The next question is, what is preventing Indigenous governments from reducing these high transaction costs? The simple answer is colonialism. Indigenous governments were systematically prevented from implementing their jurisdictions in a manner that reduced transaction costs. First Nations have been effectively prohibited from competing in the economy by the Indian Act and federal institutions. Only Indigenous jurisdictions, institutions, and systems can lower these costs and renew Indigenous economies. This is important because it explains our obsession with transaction costs. It is also why, if you attend a TULO class and you don't know the answer to a question, you should always guess the J word, jurisdiction. And if the follow-up question is something along the lines of, why do you want jurisdiction? A good first guess is that Indigenous government can use their jurisdictions to lower transaction costs and build a more sustainable and resilient economy. Just remember, however, that understanding what transaction costs are is just the beginning. It is equally or more important to know how to lower them using your jurisdiction. Here is a short list of how to lower them that are discussed in this resource. Implement land laws and procedures that move decisions and transactions to communities. Develop fair and transparent fiscal systems that provide the necessary revenues for quality services and business-grade infrastructure. Provide access to timely and accurate financial, lands, and investment facilitation information. Develop faster and more certain land and property registration frameworks. And continue to build and grow responsive and innovative Indigenous public administrations. Transaction cost competition never stops within the public sector. Economic competitive advantages can disappear in a flash with a pandemic, the introduction of a new technology, or new environmental requirements. How resilient is your economy to change? How rapidly and effectively can your public sector change your laws, systems, processes, infrastructure, and public services when you need to? Do you have the necessary jurisdiction, fiscal powers, and innovation systems to be resilient? And most importantly, how will you know you have re-established a sustainable economic system? You will know that these things have been accomplished because the transaction costs will be competitive with other economies. This is why we are so obsessed with transaction costs and how to lower them.